All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Launchpad Podcast. I'm your host, of course, Gabriel Hardy, and in this episode today, I had the honor of interviewing my friend, Emily Eaglin. Some of you might know her as Chrysantilus. She is a content creator, psychedelic creator. She's awesome. She makes these documentaries. She makes all sorts of really interesting content. She's actually a sponsor for our company, Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals. And in this episode today, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about the sort of underrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people at Burning Man and the psychedelic space in general. We talked about the global Black market that exists around ketamine. We talk about the ketamine experience. We talk about LSD. We talk about a lot of things. And so, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Go and check out all of Emily's stuff down in the description. If you haven't already, you should check out our company, Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals. Got the best Amanita, Blue Lotus, Kava Kana, legal ethnobotanical plant medicine products available. And if you use the code Amanita Ninja, one word, you'll get 10% off your order. But much love. Peace out. So it's nice to sit down and talk to you finally and stuff. Me and Christian love you and your content, by the way. You're one of our favorites for sure that we work with.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, it's really I like how you both lean into the optimization visually of things within the video and stuff, but you're still very much you have built, and there's a lot of talk out there in general about this idea of building a brand around yourself and this sort of unique sort of creator economy that's coming through. And I think that you're a really cool little beacon in that, especially with the whole, and I resonate with you, with your platform, because I also too like to be outspoken about, psychedelic drugs and altered states of consciousness and things like that. So you've been on a TikTok journey, it looks like, over the past year. I had my own little mini TikTok journey in a way, nowhere near as big as yours, but it's an interesting phenomenon, the entire thing of TikTok.
Yeah.
I mean, the creator economy, like I alluded to a minute ago, but TikTok in particular is this really interesting reflection of the collective, I feel like, right now, especially within this sort of creator economy. But what has that been like, climbing the ranks and stuff like that?
It's definitely a double-edged sword, because monetization on TikTok and making a living on TikTok is much, much easier and more accessible than YouTube. However, I can't stick with my niche on YouTube on TikTok. So even if I make videos on TikTok about an herbal tea, looking how I do, having my hair and my presentation the way that I do, I will get those videos taken down for controlled substances because people report me, or I don't know. I think there's a huge double standard on TikTok in terms of plant medicine and psychedelics, because one of my mutuals, Trip Whip, has an incredible platform where they're able to talk about all the stuff they talk about on YouTube. But I make a video about an herbal tea and I get in trouble for it. So that part is really stressful, because I wish I could talk about mushrooms, and I wish I could talk about psychs and my plant medicine journey on TikTok, but I have to make a whole entire other niche and platform and content, and it's much more goofy and pop culture based than my YouTube is.
Yeah, whenever I was talking to Tripwhip about this on the podcast, it's interesting because whenever the TikTok, I talked to him, it was a few weeks, maybe a month before the quote unquote TikTok ban was coming, whatever.
Yeah.
And like you alluded to, he has a really large following and he gets to create awesome content. But even he was just speaking about possibly going back to some sort of 9 to 5 and stopping the TikTok. And I think it came from this place of fear somewhat, of the potential legislative things that were being proposed and all the hype around that and stuff like that. But yeah, even Tripwhip was a bit and I myself, with my own platform, have experienced some of this censorship, especially with TikTok. Weirdly
Yeah.
enough, I've almost had no issues ever on YouTube. Like, I mean, knock on wood, but
Seriously, yeah.
I've gotten away with posting just about as far edgy of content that I want to put out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because it all of it, and I'm sure you kind of feel similar way. I think my best shit comes from like the true expression of me. You know what I mean? And like,
Hmm.
and so whenever I was talking to Trip Whip about this, he was describing how he's kind of over time fallen into this place with it where he has started to get somewhat unhappy because he's realized what he described is that he has had to, in order to grow, kind of had to mold himself into a more like presentable universal format thing that appeals to more people. And like it's not exactly how he was describing it, um but I remember like I had a few hundred followers on TikTok, and I made some green screen video talking about the secret language. It got over 1 million views, and like I went to almost 10K on TikTok within like less than a week. And I really thought like I had this rush of excitement, and I got hyper obsessed with it, TikTok, for a few months, and I really wasn't able to scale it up much past that. But like in that process, and I realized this, it was a psychedelic experience that I had where this became very clear after several months of this, like really going hard at TikTok. I realized I was like, it wasn't. I don't think it was hitting because like it wasn't coming from this place anymore of like true creative expression. It was like this rush to like for validation and like, well, they like that, so why isn't it working again? And like, um, yeah, I just find people's like creator journeys really interesting because of all of these different nuances that come in. It's such a powerful nexus point of like there's so much potential, but like none of it is promised.
Yeah. That's also why I think it's a double-edged sword because my content on YouTube is definitely more authentic to what I care about, but it absolutely does not pay the bills. Like the most money that I've ever made on YouTube in a month, I can make it on TikTok in a night. And that's just like a really, really big difference, especially because I'm a streamer and I do TikTok live. And I have like a really super fun, goofy stream that appeals to a lot of people. Um, but then again, sometimes you'll hop on TikTok and talk about the stuff that really matters to you or what's important to you. And it doesn't get pushed out to people in the same way it might on YouTube. So,
Yeah, and well, so what exactly is going on with, because they said it was going to be banned, and then
yeah.
it was like banned kind of for like 11 hours, and then it's not anymore. So is it good now to stay? Because this is honestly something
Um,
I've relied on friends to kind of brush me up on.
Unfortunately, it is still banned. We're still experiencing the ban. If you
Yeah,
go to the App Store right now, you would not be able to download TikTok. Like it's an
gotcha.
illegal download. And so I'm trying to move away like my strategy from being primarily a TikTok creator because from what I'm hearing, a real actual like blackout could come anywhere between 45 to 90 days from now. And everybody's sort of left in the dark about what's going to happen. I hope that that doesn't happen. But a lot of folks have been experiencing a lot more censorship on TikTok since that brief Sunday shutdown. And then a lot of Black creators have had their accounts banned out of nowhere, like massive creators with like millions of followers. And a lot of people are reporting that folks who are actually talking about like real shit on TikTok, they're having their videos taken down, they're having their accounts banned. It's like we've come back, like TikTok has come back, but it's does not feel to be the same TikTok as before. Um, yeah, so it's really scary because I think that those voices are the voices that matter the most on TikTok. So much that I've learned on that platform, whether it's like about like disability rights or like Palestine or like all this kind of stuff. Like I would not know that information if I didn't have TikTok. And so it does seem that they're making really important information, especially about marginalized groups, a bit harder to find right now, which
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah, and if you have any troubles with censorship with posts getting taken down within that area, or scaling a content of that type with a lot of effort put in. It's like there's this idea that people have put out there of a lot of these times these platforms and these companies won't outright say this is banned or this is not allowed or whatever, but there's a lot of quote unquote like shadow banning that happens where they just algorithmically suppress certain types of content. It's really not that hard for them to
Yeah.
do. And so, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if and you think about human beings with the amount of influence that an app like TikTok has, right? Like why wouldn't people want to push and simultaneously suppress certain agendas? You know what I mean? Human beings have those, especially with something like TikTok, with that much money, there's a big incentive structure behind why they would do that. And it's really like the entire thing to me, first of all, same boat as you, is like it's a shame that creators are having to deal with this, you know, but also like there's these really deep implications, I feel like, for our personal sovereignty. And I try not to get like too paranoid about that. And I'm not a politics guy. I think politics is this like incredibly complex system that I'm always observing and changing my, gathering different data on and things like that. But just any fucking sliver of like taking our sovereignty away, of, control, things like censorship, I don't like. And so, what you were describing about, like, there's a lot that you can learn from TikTok. My girlfriend was actually talking to me about this, like when we were talking about the TikTok ban coming up. She was like talking about what she likes about TikTok, and she was like, sometimes like I don't even go to Google anymore. She's like, I type shit into TikTok, and there's this really, it can be both toxic, but it can both be very valuable. This art of distilling information that I appreciate about like good creators. There's a lot of creators who are just like playing the algorithm and trying to catch attention and get views but there's a lot of people who are truly trying to like take what they have gathered through the world and their life experiences and to distill it down for other people. And I think that currently, as it is, there's a lot of people who make their living that way, doing that
Yeah.
for others on TikTok. And there's a lot of people who have, almost as if like it's their form of Google on their phone, have become accustomed to this certain app for, learning and things like that. But yeah, like I said, the core of it all, I don't like the idea of them telling us like you can't have this. Kind of like drugs. It's like what's really funny to me is, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of this. There's another app that a bunch of people are pushing called Red Note.
Mhm.
Another Chinese TikTok like app, which is actually just outright Chinese. If we're talking about national security wise, it's way more compromised than something like TikTok is. Yet, because of this prohibition of TikTok, there's this immediate sort of gap in the market that's going to be gets filled. And hey, lo and behold, it's actually less secure than the original thing that we're trying to ban. Just kind of similar to the kind of like war on drugs and, prohibition. But what do you feel?
Yeah.
How do you feel about like this idea of the legislative implications of something like this?
I think that if it was, well, the implications, it's just like, it's so disingenuous trying to frame it as a national security issue because it isn't. And all you have to do is look behind the people who are lobbying a TikTok ban. It's Meta, it's APAC, it's, I've even heard Amazon and YouTube are behind a lot of the lobbying efforts. It's just TikTok's competition. Like, that's all it was. There is no genuine national security issue that has been presented to like senators, and senators have said like, oh yeah, no, this is actually a real big problem. The issue is like, it could be an issue like 14 years down the line. Like, yo, you could say that about anything, It's just so disingenuous. And I think the issue is, we've never had a place where you could just hop online and talk some real shit and that get out to millions and millions of people. Like, I've never had a video hit 1 million views outside of TikTok, in my entire creator career. And I guess that's a threat for the government, but who cares? I don't care about the government very much. I think that out of all of the legislation that they could be focusing on right now and pushing to like save and or better lives, the fact that everybody bipartisanly could come together and get a TikTok ban through it's laughable.
Right. Yeah, 100%. This it's somewhat infuriating when you think about it at the collective energy level, right? Like how much resources and energy is going, like you said, if we're going to be putting our time and energy and resources into fixing and tweaking and optimizing and introducing new legislature, like there's a lot. It feels like as fucking American citizens, there's a lot more that we could be focused on right now, other than is TikTok bad or good, and like, um,
Yeah,
yeah,
like
it's
1/6 of children in our country are hungry.
yeah,
Like, start
yeah.
there, my God.
The fact that there is this alarming rate of children being kidnapped and being brought into the sex trafficking industry that is continuing to rise year after year, and yet we're putting more money into the war on drugs year after year is another example of this appalling behavior of this total sort of mismatch of alignment with really what are our fucking priorities. Yeah, I agree with you. It's really, and it's so obvious to anyone who looks at it. It's like this isn't for our own good in any sort of way. There's incentives behind this, and also when it comes to something like a platform like TikTok, with TikTok within the current ecosystem of like these big major platforms, it was like one more platform. The sort of like power and influence of everything was somewhat more spread out. But with it being taken away now within this United States economy, and us a lot of these users being forced back to YouTube and or Meta platforms, that this sort of monopoly over our influence and attention is being more heavily controlled and once again monopolized. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, the TikTok stuff is pretty crazy. It's really crazy, but. Mm. So, what do you think of this? I saw you made a video about it, um, but it's something that I felt compelled to make a video about as well too, because I thought it was such a crazy, sort of underrated uh, phenomenon that wasn't talked about enough. That was affecting lots of people. Is the sort of like gas station gummies, and it's not. I would say at this point, with some of the FDA sort of like heat around it, and even just like legal heat around it, I see
Yeah.
way less of it at this point right now. But like a year ago, goddamn, like 2 minutes down the road, there's 8 different, gas station gummy options available to me here in rural Kentucky. And this weird market existed all over um, the United States. And unfortunately, like, as you know, some of these things fucking end up killing people, which is like
Yeah.
really, really this weird, you think about somebody who hears about like psilocybin. To me, the entire thing felt like it preyed on consumers who were both simultaneously interested um, in potentially like trying psychedelics or mind altering substances, and but maybe didn't have the access to it or reliable access to it or something like that, and that not all of the consumers who bought were within this sort of like psychographic profile, but I think a lot of them were, and I think that was intentionally, like a lot of the marketing and things around it was preying on consumers like this. And so when I imagine like your average Joe out there, some people died from these things, but then like how many people had awful experiences because like you imagine just like you want to try psilocybin mushrooms and your first experience was some 4-ACO mixed with fucking ephedrine at too high of a dose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. What do you think about this whole sort of like gas station gummy phenomenon?
Well, one of the main missions of my channel is like a harm management and harm reduction sort of mission. And I think that the danger of gas station gummies is also applicable across a lot of different psychoactives and psychedelics. Um, I think there's a lot of safety within community, and unfortunately, when folks are not connected to a wider like plant or sacred earth medicine community, that's when you find folks sourcing in a really unsafe way. Um, I let folks know on my channels that like if you're gonna mess around with like mushrooms for the first time, just get it like in its raw, dried out form. Like that is very hard to fake, and there are tests for that. And Elevation Chemicals has amazing tests. Dance Safe has amazing tests. Like I'm always constantly encouraging everyone to test everything they put in their body, as do I. Even fentanyl tests now are super important for like ketamine, you know? But I think that it's not just an issue for gas station gummies, it's an issue for like LSD and all these other different psychs. But it is irksome, it is annoying to see people making a profit off of other people having like seizures and really adverse like medical reactions. And I think it's like they're karmically fucked. Like, you know, there's like no way around that. Like that's not the way to move. But also I think folks need to be a lot more cautious getting into psychedelics and plant medicines for the first time. Because all folks know is like alcohol. So it's like, well, if I get a beer from the gas station, it's going to be fine. So they apply the same logic and the same assumptions to sourcing other substances where that just, those rules do not apply. It's like the same thing with like, there was like spice and like incense and, you know, all of those synthetic cannabinoids being sold at gas stations too recently. And folks were seizing off of those as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really scary phenomenon as well too. Um, a friend of mine got the opportunity, and I didn't get to include this in the video that I made on my channel about the gas station going phenomenon because this happened after the fact. But a friend of mine got to speak to one of the gentlemen who owns the Diamond Shrooms company, and asked him about, because you know that particular brand is linked to a few deaths, and asked him about that, and he claimed, and you know, this is a friend of a friend. Always take these things with a grain of salt, but he claims that the products that they were making were 100% just these synthetic psychedelic tryptamines. You know, it's 40CO, things like that. But he's like, well, we didn't put other things within these products. And he's like, what I'm almost certain it was, and this would make some sense. And I'm not saying this is what happened, right? And there's a whole sort of, I'm sure, a lot of legal stuff that needs to happen to figure out. But what he swears up and down he thinks happened is that the market in general, not just the Diamond Shrooms, but a bunch of these other kind of big brands that were nationwide, there was this influx of these products were already somewhat counterfeit in a way, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a counterfeit of these counterfeits, if that makes sense. So like back in the day, there was a huge problem with big cart companies having counterfeit carts where you could buy the packaging and the you know cartridge itself, and people could load these things up with cheap distillate and whatever the fuck else for a really cheap price and sell them as branded products and do
That's the
this at
other thing
scale.
though, too, the price. You should
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
You should know that
Yeah.
a cart isn't just going to cost like $5. That's also
Yeah.
some critical thinking on the consumer, but
100%, 100%. But what he swears up and down happens with these incidents where people died, and they have found, like I said earlier, I think it was like ephedrine and other weird additives. That it's like, why would you, even from the even if you were going about this completely black market and trying to make millions of dollars at scale across the country, and it wouldn't make sense for you to put these things in your products because they wouldn't sell more. Like you would know there's likely to be deaths if you do this at scale. Then it's a lot of legal heat and attention on you, and you're really trying to get your money and get out with these type of guys, you know. So it wouldn't make sense to put in something like ephedrine or whatever it was that was, you know, harming people. And so he really swears that it was either out of negligence, somebody who did this whole sort of counterfeit operations where they flooded the market with a bunch of these counterfeits of the counterfeits, you know, and or it was either negligence or it was nefarious purposes, like purposely, and this idea of I don't know if this would fall under like biological or like biological warfare, but like there is, certain politics with flooding countries with certain drugs and things like that and bringing them into their economies. We have a history as a country of doing that ourselves, and so, and there's right now with the, fentanyl and things like that, that's something that's kind of being done. And there's a lot of layers to that. I know, but, that is something that's kind of being acted in a way against us. And so, like, it's not too far of a stretch to think that some of these incidents and some of these things that hurt people were counterfeit products. And I don't know that to be the truth, but yeah, if you think about it from another country's standpoint, it would make sense if you were trying to find a way to enact covert warfare on their population. You saw this weird market that was cropping up with mushroom gummies, and you knew exactly why this market was cropping up, and you knew exactly how to make these things. Yeah. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I think first off, for any legal team that could be potentially watching this interview, for all of the specific companies we're naming, everything is alleged. Secondly, if any mushroom bar, mushroom gummies, like if there's anything in your product that is not exactly what you are advertising or what's not in the nutritional facts, whatever, like that is inherently nefarious. Like to pass off one substance as a medicine, like that's not playing fair. A lot of the sort of like counterfeit chocolate bars, uh like I'll say the dots, like y'all will know what I mean by the dots. You can find the packaging on Alibaba. Like just that fact alone should make you never comfortable with purchasing a bar with dots on it. Because in my video on my channel, I compare like the fake packaging versus the real packaging, you know? Um it's I tell people like just like don't mess with the mushroom bars at all. Um unless you have a friend who made them, and don't mess with the mushroom gummies unless it's like MN Nice Ethno, obviously. Like there aren't that many people out here making like actually like reputable mushroom products right now. Um and so it's super dangerous, and I tell people on my channel all the time, like don't play around with your life. Like it's so much more worth waiting a few months to source properly and like figure out your trip and like a safe journey and adventure, rather than just sourcing super quickly a neighbor or at the gas station. I think that it, like, sure, it could be a foreign entity, it could be another country, but it could also just be some folks who are obsessed with an extremely quick and profitable come up and are continuously rebranding themselves like every single season. So, like, this season, it could be the mushroom stuff, the next season, it could be spice, you know? And they don't care whether you live or die because it's an extremely profitable come up for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if you ever heard this, but there was issues within the Blue Lotus industry. I don't know if they're as prevalent nowadays, but there's been issues within the Blue Lotus industry of a lot of different Blue
Outside of the
Lotus.
die.
A lot of the dye is a big issue, but also a lot of a lot of products are marketed and labeled Blue Lotus products and sold in that way, but it's actually synthetic cannabinoids. My brother-in-law was actually a victim like of this. He was in the military, a friend within his unit late at night. They're all in the barracks and stuff. It's like, hey, I ordered this online. The name of it was like something like Blue Lotus sauce. It was a vape juice.
Oh
And they
no.
loaded up this vape juice and started toking on it. And like somebody fucking like seized out, and like it was this, and they were all okay. But yeah, it just speaks to this really kind of like crazy industry. And yeah, the thing you were saying about the chocolate bars, I agree, and I'll also push that sentiment of like it's just generally not a good idea to buy and source your chocolate bars from other people. But it's kind of a shame because that is, and I would encourage people to make them for themselves at home, or like with your friends, because like that's one of my
Yeah,
favorite.
recipe on my channel if you want to make your own mushroom chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Go to Chrysantilus.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of the best. A lot of people struggle with that actual process of consuming the mushrooms. But I think the chocolate bar makes it very palatable for most people.
Okay,
Most
but
people. Uh-huh.
can I just say, it's like uh, you should you should a little bit get used to the taste
I
and the flavor and the earthiness of consuming mushrooms, because
I
chocolate
agree.
bars are a little bit like poppers, okay? Like,
Uh-huh.
let's not rely on it too much for the ends of the means or what. Like, let's get used to the actual raw act, and then we
Yeah.
can take the poppers after, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I appreciate you say that because I agree with that. There's something, and I will be honest, I don't like the taste, but I taste them, if that makes sense. I
You
like
got to.
the chewing them up. I don't know. I know we've sent you some products and stuff like that, but those Amanita caps that I sent you, there's a lot of people make teas and stuff out of them. Me and Christian, we like them. Like we like eating them raw. Like I like them raw. Um, and like I've eaten really large doses of them raw as well too. And like once again, I don't like the taste, but it kind of reminds me of like this like punching my ticket and like my this little buy-in that I'm doing, and like it's funny to me because some people will be really repulsed by the idea or the taste of mushrooms,
Hmm.
eating mushrooms like that. But it's like, I see people endlessly go through this pain and torture of taking like a shot of alcohol. You know what I mean? And it's not because alcohol
Yeah.
tastes good. I can't stand that. When people are like, it's an acquired taste. It tastes good. It's like, no, you like the GABAergic effects on your brain, and it's like a dog salivating. That's why you think it, But like, there's this thing that people do with alcohol where it's like, I'm okay with the taste and this like half second of mouth displeasure because of the effects that are on the other side. And I feel very
Yeah.
similarly about psilocybin mushrooms. Like, okay, if every time it makes you throw up or something, yeah, maybe there's something we can work on. Maybe we could try lemon tea or whatever. But like, that feels like sort of part of the buy-in is eating those, eating the things.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Absolutely.
I
I
agree
think
with
at
that.
least like for your first time, given that you don't have any like gastro or stomach issues, like you definitely should try eating them for your first time. After that, like I recommend teas, I recommend smoothies, because I talk about this on my channel a lot, but like you'll have a much smoother come up with teas, because it's not just like random digestive like firing of like the all of the different chemicals that are going on. You can actually have like a controlled and even intake with teas. Um, uh, but yeah, I think every medicine comes with its shadow side and its shadows, and like trying to engineer out the shadowy side of a medicine, a lot of the times you sell yourself short. And I think that the taste, if you can't stand like the taste of the mushroom, like wait 30 minutes until you actually get into the shit of how it makes you feel. The taste is nothing compared to the trip.
Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of reminds me of like a topic that I wanted to talk to you about today. Um, but that's LSD, right? This is something I've been talking about a lot on my channel. It's been on my mind a lot here recently. I I've seen you've made some content about LSD. I get this feeling that you've taken some LSD yourself as well too.
I love her. I love her. I have
Hmm.
to do more videos about LSD, honestly.
Hmm.
Like a big video coming up is going to be like my first time actually trying LSD and sitting with LSD. But I love her. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy that you love her because I do as well too. I think she's a very very special, and I also feel like she's being mm, underrepresented within this sort of psychedelic renaissance right now. It feels like all of the it's because you once again this kind of like vetting this buying for attention and trying to get it seems like a lot of people that are the quote unquote thought leaders within this space, and mind you, a lot of that is
Don't get
this
me
kind of
started
like
on them.
yeah, and mind you, a lot of this is like legitimate pharmaceutical financial control and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I really, it almost feels intentional. I don't think it's completely unconscious. I think there's been this somewhat intentional effort by they or them or these people, right, to underrepresent LSD and kind of put it on the back burner in a way. All of the focus is on psilocybin, and I think psilocybin is, magical and like all the things, right? But I just something from the beginning is like, why aren't more people talking about LSD? And also, LSD, I think, presents this somewhat unique opportunity where, just a minute ago, you were describing that, it's like these plants, they have a shadow self. And I've described a similar concept a lot of times before, that I feel like these medicines have like a certain spirit attached to them. And like you feel that when you take them and you interface with them and you develop your relationship with them. Um, and I feel like LSD is this really kind of like unique opportunity where it feels like it's entwined with our American spirit. And I think, and like with something like ayahuasca, like ibogaine, there's a long, even psilocybin mushrooms, there's a long, deep standing like history and sort of like cultural imprint on it, and a question of like how we merge that with our world while still learning from and paying respects to the indigenous teachings and all the things like that. But with LSD, it feels like it was like, I know it was made in Switzerland and it was sort of a worldwide phenomenon, but yet it was honestly kind of an Americans interfacing with it was really what like skyrocketed it. And it really had a lasting impact on our culture that still stands to this day, right? That's a really interesting part of it, is that it's had a larger impact on our culture and all the people currently existing within these positions than psilocybin. Like just speaking like quantitatively with, it's had a larger impact, yet it's underrepresented. And I have a lot of like theories and ideas of why that might be, but like I kind of wanted to ask you about this and get your feeling on LSD, and if you also feel like it's kind of being underrepresented within the psychedelic community.
Yeah, it's definitely been extremely underrepresented. I think it has had a bigger known impact on like a lot of, especially like musical culture and pop culture. And I think mushrooms has had possibly potentially a similar impact, but not necessarily spoken or talked about, or like, especially in terms of like organizing circles and different stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I think it is a disservice to not speak on LSD, to not talk about LSD, especially when some of the most impactful LSD got its start literally like right here in New York, where I am right now. You know what I mean? Some like labs in New York that like I could probably drive to if I had a car with me. It does have a really beautiful history, and I think that it's harder, or I think probably certain organizations find it harder to make a case for legalization um, without something like mushrooms already being legal, or without something like MDMA already being legal. So I think that like obviously cannabis was first, and then they saw that as opening the door for mushrooms and MDMA. And then like my only hope is that that opens the door also for LSD, because when I sit with LSD, I way more have like my wits about myself. I feel much safer to sit with LSD when I'm in public or when I'm at a burn. That is like my go-to substance for like when I am at Burning Man, and like I can ride my bike, like I can interface with people, like I don't feel in danger, and I can literally just like be by myself and like whiling out and having the best time with her. Um, and like I also think, yeah, ketamine legalization is also super important and something that like we should be talking about. But LSD for certain, I think she should get her flowers. And also, if you are watching this and you do not test your LSD, like start testing your LSD. A lot of paper that is edible paper is not actually LSD. And if somebody says acid, they could mean street chemicals. So Elevation Chemicals actually has some really great kits for testing LSD, and I'd recommend anybody watching this to get those.
I recommend that as well too. My buddy Tyler, he has a YouTube channel, Find the Others. Tyler Saucier, Find the Others. I love Tyler. But he sent me an article. It was a couple of days ago, and I just read it this morning. Actually, it's a really interesting article. I forget this gentleman's name. I'll have to dig it up, and I'll put it in the description of this podcast. But this gentleman was talking about this same kind of topic of LSD and its underrepresentation within the media. And one of the things that a big theory of his as to why that currently is the two sort of biggest reasons are the amount of money that already currently goes into the clinical research with psilocybin, and with the metabolic half-life of LSD being pretty much twice as long, it makes clinical research a lot more expensive with LSD. And there is this a lot of what incentivizes this research. It'd be great if it came from this place as like a collective. We decided on this was important, and like this is, like this is for the good of the collective, for the good of all. Right? That's what we put our resources to. But like the incentive behind it is because they think at the end of it they can get some sort of payout, right? And so, yeah, a lot of reason why psilocybin is at the forefront is because the people who have the most money at the front of all of this, doing the research and things like that, ultimately, are driven by that. This sort of like gold rush to get there and have a headlock on it, and psilocybin is a really good way to do that. And another part of this theory is that, somewhat like I was alluding to with LSD being entwined with this like American spirit, I think that that's true, but it's not just the American spirit. It's kind of like this like anti-establishment, countercultural spirit, and it's kind of had that ever since the 60s, and it's not even just experientially it has this whatever, but there's a cultural associating LSD with that, right? And so part of this theory is that psilocybin is being pushed more and at the forefront more because it doesn't have this same sort of counterculture.
Also,
the counterculture movement packed behind it. Instead, what it has is this sort of mental health white lab coat syndrome behind it, where there's more money to be made and more control. And it really got into a lot of layers. This article is really deep, but I found that really interesting. And I'm not fully sold on all that yet, but I think he's definitely onto something. The ketamine thing, I think ketamine's really interesting, really important. I've talked a lot.
Ketamine is my boyfriend. Like ketamine, like I love ketamine.
I've talked about ketamine a lot here recently, not a whole lot, but I was talking to my buddy Christian about it, and I was describing that I feel like ketamine is both simultaneously, and I've seen this enacted out like within people and their experiences with it, but it simultaneously is and isn't a trap. There's this feeling
you have
with
to have
ketamine. There's this feeling with ketamine. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Especially, I experienced this on a lot of like really deep experiences, but it can almost feel like I'm like solving something somewhere in the universe, and this like simultaneously like both this like this feeling within the experience that I've solved it, but then this like energetic, somatic, therapeutic effect that lasts with me for quite some time after. And I know there's measurable sort of the physiological afterglow, but there's something to this phenomenon of like feeling like you're solving something. And there's, I say all that because I think that's where like this interesting alchemization lies with it, with a lot of people, and like actually wielding it to their benefit or not to their benefit is like those experiences are important. And maybe you are like psycho-spiritually solving something somewhere. But my buddy Christian, he was like, he was talking about it. He's like, it gets to a point though, he's like, where it's not as important anymore, and like the detriment that you're doing to your body and things like that. But yeah, I
Yeah,
kind of want
can
to get your.
I really
Yeah,
quickly like piggyback off of one really quick thing before I get into ketamine? I think a lot of people have like a natural bias, especially like the crunchy side of the psychedelic community. And I just want to say, like, I don't personally have that. I don't hold like natural or organic medicines like above human made substances or anything like
I
that.
agree.
When it comes to ketamine, I think you have to have way more self control than all of these other medicines that we're talking about, because we're talking about like anti addictive medicines, like, obviously like psilocybin, like LSD, like all these different things. You can't do them back to back. You know what I mean? You can't do them multiple days in a row. With ketamine, you can do it one weekend and then the next weekend you were like, oh, I got to get back to the puzzle. Like you're like itching for it. You know what I mean? You're like, I got to get back to the puzzle. Got to
Yeah,
find
the
that corner
puzzle.
piece.
The corner piece. That's
Got to
funny.
get that corner piece. So you
Yeah.
have to exercise so much more restraint when it comes to ketamine. And also, like, I don't have any friends who have ever had an issue with their relationship to psilocybin or LSD, but I do have a lot of folks who have fallen out of balance with how often they use ketamine or sit with ketamine. And what's so unfortunate here, as much as I love my boyfriend ketamine, the effects of ketamine long term are not known.
Hmm.
And some of the ones that are known about ketamine are really freaky, like the
Yeah.
crystallization of the bladder, like having to potentially have your bladder removed because you've done so much ketamine.
My
Like,
friend just went to the doctor this morning and he thinks it might be something related to this. He's having issues right now with peeing stuff, and he had a history of abusing ketamine, and here of the past month or so has had a couple of ketamine benders within like these events and things like that. And now he's getting checked out and he's worried about fucking peeing like his so yeah, it's very real. It's very real.
yeah, and that's just what's known.
Right.
Like, that's just what's known.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say ketamine can be like less reliable in terms of sourcing. Um, Recently, I've had the same source in Baltimore City. I now am in Brooklyn, but I had the same source in Baltimore City for years, and they were telling me like all the stuff they got was like tested in a lab and all this different kind of stuff. And I was like, that's all good. I am still going to test whatever you give me because I cannot take your word for it. I took that shit home. And when I tell you it was supposed to turn, as the girlies know at home, what? Bright blue purple with the reagent test, it turned green. And I sent my source a picture and I was like, love, this is not ketamine. Like what you gave me is not ketamine. It had little specks of the blue and the purple in it. Um, but a lot of what's in the street right now as ketamine is being faked. And it literally shocked my source because they were like, oh my goodness, I have given this to so many people and they've come back for more because they think it's actually ketamine. So
What is it?
in addition to actually having ketamine and getting side effects from ketamine, whatever research chemicals that they're passing off as ketamine, it's like, who the hell knows what
There's
what sort of side effects
yeah.
those could lead to. So you have to be triple careful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of very interesting these different research chemical dissociatives, and I think they're interesting, but they're only interesting if you have like if you're like consensually, consuming that
Sodomy.
sort of thing knowingly, that's the only situation in which they have the potential to be. But there's a whole really interesting market around these research chemical dissociatives that, like you're alluding to. I've tried one of them. There was one that was really popular on the market a couple of years ago. It's called fluorexetamine, FXE. It was very similar to ketamine, felt very similar to ketamine. Um, the main difference was that it was about twice as long. Um,
Love it.
and people
That sounds
started
great.
and of course, with these things, all you can really pull from is anecdotal data, right? Like people within forums and things like that. And it seemed like so many nuances to this, but it seemed like this fluorexetamine was harder on people's bodies. People really liked it.
Mm,
I
yeah.
enjoyed it. I thought it was a beautiful. I had a beautiful experience um, with it. But once again, I knowingly like consumed this and was ready and prepared myself and tested it and all the things like that. Right, but it seemed like it was harder on people's bodies. And there's a lot of dissociatives like this where they're, people talk, you alluded to some of the potential pitfalls of ketamine that people can fall into, and those are real. But there's other dissociatives that are even more addictive or even more physically harmful for your body. And so, yeah, this idea, and it makes me curious as to what the particular, like research chemical or substitute that they were using for this ketamine is, because like the global ketamine black market is so complex and there's so much money in it. Um, yeah, do you have any
The
idea?
what I tested back as a potential positive for something called methylone,
Methadone.
and it was either methylone or Ritalin, which
Uh-oh.
that's not even a dissociative.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes when you mix two things, it could have a dissociative effect.
And you said there was the specks of the blue and the purple, and so
Real
uh,
small stacks, like.
yeah, yeah, it kind
And
of reminds.
I've also received a lot of ketamine that's had specks of MDMA in them. Like that's pretty common too.
Interesting. It is somewhat reminds me of the ecstasy, quote unquote, ecstasy phenomenon globally as well too. There like I am a huge fan. I've done it maybe 6 or 7 times in the course of 8 years now. I'm not like I've never abused it, but I've had beautiful experiences and hold like MDMA and MDA as like sacred tools, like these really profound sacred tools. And like these,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that that little Easter egg got left for us and exists. I think it's a divine thing, it's sacred. But the ecstasy market and the phenomenon of, there is pure MDMA that you can take for rays, but there's a lot of things that are sold as ecstasy, and most of it is like this crazy pool of essentially what you end up getting was what was most sort of convenient for the manufacturer to make this mixture with. And a lot of times it's mixtures of like different 2C analogs mixed with ket, mixed with cocaine, mixed with amphetamines, mixed with a little bit of MDMA. And like that's not even an
Yeah.
exaggeration. Like a good amount of these ecstasy blends are these crazy conglomeration of sort of cheap substances and things. And so, what is even more alarming to me about that is that so many consumers are completely aware of like what I'm describing here, or mostly aware of what I'm describing here, but they're ultimately what they're buying into is like the ecstasy experience, like knowing like this isn't just MDMA. I'm kind of just rolling the dice on what's in here, but I'm buying into the ecstasy experience, with ketamine becoming more and more in demand in this weird kind of headlock that is on the global market, because there's a very flourishing global black market around ketamine, but it's one of these compounds that's similar to something like PCP or LSD or something like that. Like it takes a good amount of like, a lot of things to come together for you to become an efficacious black market ketamine manufacturer and get that out across the world. Right. And so there's all these markets where these little pockets of really big demand and people want ketamine, are willing to buy ketamine. And so people are going to fill the gap, whether that's really expensive, real price ketamine or some fucking fake ketamine. It kind of
Yeah, and
reminds me
that's
of
the
like the
thing is like
ecstasy.
there are certain areas in your life where like, okay, maybe we should be cutting costs. This is not one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What do you think about? Um, can you tell me a little bit about like your experiences with dissociatives? Do you feel like they've been beneficial along your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Um like ketamine has absolutely gotten me out of like really, really, really rough situations that I knew I personally should not be in, especially like interpersonal relationships, and like I remember like literally my last partnership. I've cried about it on my YouTube channel, but I haven't gone into specifics about like how bad it actually was. But I remember just like lying down next to this person on their bed, and ketamine literally gave me the message of like, girl, like this is the last time we're gonna do this. Like this is not it. This is not the move. Like you are so much stronger than this. Like you can get out of this situation. You have the power to get out of this situation, and you will get out of this situation. And different medicines have connected me with different messages. Like LSD gave me the message to like stop drinking alcohol, and I will like always hold gratitude for that. Like ketamine gave me the message to like get out of certain situations and relationships that were really dangerous to be in. And I am so grateful to it. I need to find a more reliable source for it, because I just think that like playing around with ketamine that might not actually be ketamine is like too dangerous right now. And I'm in Brooklyn, so I'm sure I just need to go to a comedy club and ask around, you know. Um, but I am very grateful for the experience of ketamine, and uh just it's something that I feel comfortable and safe to be able to do alone and to do by myself. Whereas you know, if I were to do a hefty dose of magic mushrooms alone, I might burn the house down. And I mean, I talk about that on my channel a lot, because there's a lot of like really this is like a slightly different topic, but there's a lot of really irresponsible advice around psychedelics, on YouTube, like really, really bad advice from a lot of creators who don't know what they're talking about. And so ketamine, I really do think that you can do alone and be safe as long as you get the dosing right, as long as you test it. Um, and it's a good time. It's a great time as long as you can have your wits about frequency and stuff like that, especially.
Yeah, yeah. Ketamine is this unique combination of you can go deep and have these introspective moments, and it can lead to transformation. But there's both this really deep altered state of consciousness that you can experience with this simultaneous like anesthetic quality to it that can make it very safe. When it comes to like the whole realm of inner work and like healing and self-optimization and approaching, you know, reassociating with traumas and things like that, it reminds me a little bit of MDMA in terms of it seems to offer, like I just said, both this space to do that while with also this kind of like comfort blanket of like, hey, it's like going to be okay, you know, which I think
Yeah.
it's a really unique tool in that way. There was, you know, in ketamine, it's really interesting to me for a lot of reasons, but it's so popular right now within our country, across the world. But it's really popular right now within our country in the psychedelic esoteric space, but then also within the rave scene, music festival culture. It's really big, and it's really gotten a lot more popular over the past, you know, 10, 20 years or so, primarily the past like 5, 10 years, but it's just continuing to grow in popularity. And so it makes me wonder about what the butterfly effect of that is on like culture as a whole. You know, kind of like I alluded to with LSD, of like, if you think about it, it had a large impact on our culture,
Yeah.
with how many people were doing it. Yeah, I kind of
When
wanted the
I was
same thing
at
about
Burning
ketamine.
Man, they called ketamine MAPS cocaine,
I love that. That's a great name.
which I thought was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
And also, like, the there are certain like devastating implications of like cocaine use, especially in a party space, that I just don't think are there in ketamine. Like I've looked for it, I can't find it. And that's not to stigmatize cocaine at all. I think uh I recently read the book Drug Use for Grown-ups by
I
Dr.
love
Carl
that
Hart.
book.
It's like one
Such
of
a
the
good
most
book.
incredible books. And so like anything that we think of as like a hard drug or like a bad drug, like actually that's just something we need to probably like destigmatize in our mind and figure out like why we think that, because the vast majority of adults and grown-ups can have perfectly healthy relationships from anything from like cocaine to even heroin, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be like an insane relationship, but I will say ketamine feels a bit, just in terms of like a party like rave sort of use, it feels safer in that like you cannot so easily overdose on it. And cocaine is actually, I read a statistic once that said like cocaine is like the most overdosable common substance that we have. Like the most overdoses are actually on cocaine, and like nobody really talks about that. And so I love to see it more normalized, side by side with cocaine. And again, that's like not to stigmatize cocaine at all. Um, it doesn't have to be like cocaine is not for me. It doesn't have to be for me. Ketamine is definitely for me, so I have a bias towards it. Uh, but I do love to see ketamine in the party space, because it used to be like somebody whipped out some white powder, and I used to be like, no, I'm
No.
sorry. And now I have to be like, oh, what is that? You know, like ask the
Yeah.
question. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I agree with that. I think cocaine as well too. It seems to have a more I've seen people go back to the ketamine bag quite a bit and dip into it a lot throughout a night.
Hmm.
But cocaine generally seems to have this more sort of like fiendish redosing behavior involved with it. It seems like, plus, it seems like with cocaine, there's more issues with sort of the cross reactivity that it has with other substances, especially like, dopaminergic substances and things like that. And
Hmm.
this so I can get like physiologically dangerous. Of course, it's got its own sort of weird LD50 of its own and things like that. I've done cocaine 5 or 6 times in my life. Not my cup of tea either. I can see how some people get addicted to it. After having done it, I can see how some people get addicted to it. But once again, it's to me, it was like what you just said. I love that book as well too. Drug Use for Grown-ups, one of the best books of all
Everybody
time.
should read it.
I spent an entire acid trip reading that fucking book and listening. I read it for a while. I had already read the entire book, but for some reason I took acid this day. I was at home, and that his whole like message and everything was really like playing on my heartstrings. And I was like, I know I've digested this book, but I was like flipping through it and like almost like speed reading it in this weird way. And then I was digesting a lot of his I got obsessed with this man on LSD for one day in his book, and I love this book. But in there he talks about how him and his wife sometimes like to do cocaine, and of course, like he tests it, makes sure it's pure, and they're at home and they go to bed early and things like that. Um, but I've done cocaine a few times myself now too, and to me, it's kind of easy for me to not associate it as like a quote unquote hard drug, because after having done it, I can see, oh, as long as it's like pure cocaine, I almost get like more high off of like a Red Bull or something. Like I'm more sensitive to caffeine than I am. Like I definitely have a pronounced psychoactive effect, but it was almost in this way of like, this feels like a slight stimulant to me right now, and I'm not even a big
Yeah.
stimulant guy, right? Like so. I don't know. It's like it didn't feel like a hard drug in that sense. Where it feels like it becomes hard is like, cartels killing people over it and like fentanyl possibly being in it. That's where like the hardness seems to come in with something like cocaine, you
Yeah.
know?
Can I just say, I think I'd be way too annoying on cocaine. Like, I have so many movie ideas, and I know I would
Yeah.
not shut up about any of them. And
Hmm.
also, I think I will do it just on my deathbed. Like,
Really?
I think I'll do it on my deathbed. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely. If I was ever in hospice care or something, like,
Yeah.
psh, all rules are out the window.
Yeah. Like it's like I said, it's not my cup of tea, but if like my grandpa was on hospice and whipped out a bag of cocaine, like, yeah, dude, let's do some coke. You know what
Come
I'm saying?
on,
Like
time and a
this.
place.
I'm gonna light some sage. You say a prayer. It's gonna be ceremony, And like that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing about it, though, is that I do think that our preconceived notions of these things and so much of what we bring into it shapes the experience. Don't get me wrong. I think the physical matter of it and how the receptor side activity, I do think all that matters. But there was a really interesting study where they gave, it was this group of college kids. They took this and split them off into these two groups. And they gave one of them, and they had controls for this as well too, controls set up, but they gave one group a benzodiazepine and told them that you're testing out this new amphetamine, like stimulant, like drug of ours, you know, and so take it today, report back how you feel and stuff like that. Overwhelming majority of them came back and were like, wow, like so relaxed, slept amazing, like really appalling results. And then they flipped it, same thing. They gave a bunch of people this um,
Mm-hmm.
this benzo and told them it was an amphetamine, or you know, and uh, yeah, and they took the freaking benzo and they're super productive and
Yeah.
energized,
Yeah.
and so I do think a lot of our preconceived notions, and you can feel this play out within sort of like the psychedelic experience as well too, you know. Um,
Absolutely. A lot of the practitioners that I know went to really extreme lengths in learning about all these different medicines, in that they were given a high dose of these medicines and just not told what it was. Um, and I call that the lavender effect, because there are different ideas around the scent of lavender. Like if you tell somebody like, hey, this is a very sleepy scent, it's going to be relaxing, it's going to put you to sleep, they'll smell lavender and they'll be like, oh, I'm tired now. But if you're like, this is an energizing smell, it's like the most energizing flower, they'll smell and they're like, I'm ready for my day, I'm energized, you know? So it's really interesting seeing a lot of these like underground practitioner trainings, sort of like nobody knows what it's going to be. You know, you might go down a K-hole, you might do some, you don't know what it's about to be. And you can have a really, I'd say almost more objective experience when you're not given a heads up about
mhm.
what you're about to experience.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting you say that because a good buddy of mine here locally, he just acquired what are called Sananga eye drops, and they're these this liquid you put into your
I've
eyes, and it
taken
has.
it before.
I've never done it, and I actually, believe it or not, haven't done too much research on it. And I haven't watched like any content really about it. Very, very, very little. Consume very little about this, and we were talking about doing it here soon, having this experience together and trying it. He sourced them from a Shipibo shaman apparently, but we're talking about it, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna brush up on it a little bit more, you know, about the Sananga and stuff where we jump into it. And he's like, wait, dude. He was like, how about we don't? He's like, you know, he's like, because you think about it, like a lot of the substances that we've tried and just people try in general,
That's
going
actually
into
like the
it,
best advice he could give you about Sananga.
it was really, and when he said that, I was like, you know what, you're right, dude. Like I have this general approach, and I've always been like this, and I think this is like safe and smart, really, generally most of the time, of like
Yeah.
really trying to understand what these things are about before diving into them and things like that. But it also, I think, can sometimes be, you can go overboard with that, and it can be toxic, and it can be massively influential to how the experience is going to be. You know, there's a whole sort of theory that Terence McKenna was the individual who maybe implanted the quote unquote machine elves into this space by rippling this throughout culture and implanting this within a bunch of people's minds and preconceived notions before they did DMT. That's an interesting one because I think it's like, I think that's both true and not true, you know, like I think that, but yeah.
Yeah. With Sananga, can I say, I
Mhm.
don't like to make overarching generalizations about specific genders, but it did teach me something about the pain tolerance of men,
Interesting.
because I watched a bunch of people share their Sananga experiences before I had mine for the first time. I sat in the ceremony that started with rape, then it was Sananga, then I was administered combo, and it finished out with Bufo, 5-MeO DMT.
Whoa.
And I was the most afraid of the Sananga, because I have eyeball stuff. I don't do eyeballs. I don't like eyeball stuff. I don't do eyeball stuff. I'm horrified. And so I was fine to be burned in my skin. I was fine to purge. I was fine to do all this kind of other stuff. But all of the men giving testimony about Sananga, they're all like, it's the most painful thing you'll ever experience. Like, it's like getting maced, essentially. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, oh my God. I got so in my head about that it was hard to even prepare for the rest of the ceremony because I was just horrified about the pain. And when I tell you, it was like, it hit me like some salt water. I was like, yo, I've had menstrual cramps way worse than this. Like, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? It ended up not being it was not close to mace or pepper spray at all.
Yeah, I would believe it that I have heard this generally that men have a lower pain tolerance than women, and
They do.
There's like evolutionary reasons and things that people can point to and stuff like that. But also, it's like maybe there's something at this sort of like psycho spiritual level going on with this as well too. I don't know, but
Definitely, like all of culture and society and the world as it is set out is to protect the comfort of men and like cradle the comfort of men. So a lot of men may experience a much more comfortable existence. And again, that's like a generalization. Doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but all you have to do is watch one of those videos of a man hooked up to a TENS machine. Have you seen those?
with the that simulates the contractions and
Contractions? Yeah.
yeah,
And
I've seen some of these videos.
do you know that women use those exact machines to alleviate menstruation cramps? To alleviate our pain.
So okay, so what you're describing here, do you think that that this is a somewhat like psycho somatic thing as well too? Like one thing that I've noticed, not just between like men or women, but it seems like people in general, is that people talk about like trust fund babies or sheltered people and things like that, and privileged. And when I see people and interact with people who truly have lived these very sheltered lives and haven't had to overcome a lot of adversity, it's almost like their tolerance to not even just like physical pain, but like any sort of pain in general is a lot lower. You know what I mean? And I don't think it's a benefit in a way. Like when I see like a quote unquote trust fund baby, it's like, well, you've kind of been handicapped in a way. Like some of the most like lovable, down to earth people I've ever met, it's because they had crazy extenuating circumstances and hardships through which they had to overcome and get over and things like that.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this thing that you're describing with men, is that sort of like, what do you feel like is somewhat being played out? This,
Yeah, definitely
yeah.
in terms of that and in terms of perception. They say that your true reality of perception ends at your privilege. You know what I mean? Like that's where your reality, like your perception of reality actually ends. And so for me as an able-bodied woman, you know, my perception of how the world works and how reality works and all that kind of stuff, it ends at my being able-bodied. Like I'm not actually able to see the world in its full reality from the perspective of someone who's disabled. I'm living actually a completely different existence or experience to
Yeah.
them. And so I think it has to do a lot with that. And also, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I see it as like rather neutral. I think what would be ideal is if everybody's comfort could be equally prioritized, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always such a balance with all of that. That seems like it's, everyone's own unique journey to like strike, right? Like the complete leaning into the comfort and hedonistic ways is not the path, but like the complete opposite of like completely leaning into, discomfort and discipline. And that's also can be toxic. It's like there is this middle way that people can find, but honestly, I feel like when you do find the middle way, it's very heavenly. You know, a lot of people talk about that middle way, but it's really hard alchemization. It feels like, um, for a lot of people to strike, you know, and I guess like it's making me think out loud because what you're proposing, like if it's true that if it's true that men in general, and like this is something like you're describing, kind of like observe, if it's true that men in general have a lower pain tolerance than women, right? Um, and maybe this is both. Maybe this is just a physical thing. Maybe this is both a physical and a psychological thing. All this stuff, but if they do have a lower pain tolerance, would that, in some situations, could that be considered like an actual like detriment? Kind of like I was describing about like trust fund babies,
Hmm.
you know, because like it feels like of course it can always be too much. Like, you know, there's those days where you're like, God, I don't want to be your toughest soldier. Like, I'm not your toughest soldier today. But
Yeah, and
like,
you're a parent too.
yeah,
Yeah, they say
yeah,
parents are God's toughest soldiers, strongest soldiers, absolutely.
yeah. And like, there's some days where there's this feeling of like, God, I can't be your toughest soldier today. But also, like, you know, and in hindsight, most people who've been through these really difficult things and have been able to alchemize it into something positive, they're very grateful for that sort of like evil that they had to like brush up against, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But
totally.
yeah, I'm just kind of like thinking about all this out loud here and stuff with you. But yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
very
I think
interesting.
that any like blockage that we personally have to
Hmm.
being able to perceive the world as it actually functions is a detriment.
Yeah.
Which is why in whatever sort of way we are not personally marginalized, it's extremely important to listen to the voices of folks who have a lived marginalized experience, just so we can actually get even a whiff of the way that the world is really working. Because like how I mentioned, like being perceived like with locks and as a black woman and all this kind of stuff on TikTok, like, I had my account banned from going live for a week just for saying the word gay.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and like I have had like unnecessary strife and unnecessary things that I've had to go through just because I don't look like anybody else on TripTube. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
really, really hard to find somebody else on TripTube who has a similar lived experience to me or who even looks like me at all. But really quick, speaking of TripTube, I really do want to do the group trip to Cosm.
Hmm.
I really
I've been,
think that's important. And I don't know which group chat I have to like bump that conversation up in. I don't know if it's the Discord or the Instagram.
me neither, girl. We'll figure it out though. We'll figure it out.
When I tell you it's so
Mhm.
important to
Yeah.
me, and I
Hmm.
think I do believe that the Greys would be down to host if we were just like, yo, the trip tubers are coming. What month works for y'all?
Yeah, I agree. This is something I've been. Tyler is really adamant about this. Jake's on
Okay,
board. There's a
Tyler.
lot. Tyler's very adamant about this. He seems almost
Okay.
like he's going to be a leader within like the coordination of it all and things, which I'm going to let him lean into. I
I'll
love that.
help him. I'm in New York.
I'm sure he'd be happy to have you help him. But I agree. I've said I've like there's something about that I think is gonna be such a unique little nexus point. You know, there's so much that we've all brought to the table there and stuff like that. But um, just to backtrack a tiny bit and what you're describing, um, yeah, about like how we kind of like have to the are we're limited by our perception of reality, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's very true. Like I think that what we're offered within like this body and this experience is like this little sliver of the truth, and it's like my truth, it's my perspective of the truth. But really what the truth is like, and I know this is a very loaded word, but what I really think like the truth is God, and it's the accumulation of like all of our perspectives. You know what I mean? And so to
Mm-hmm.
even try to begin to start to understanding the truth, I feel like you have to at least attempt to put yourself into other people's experiences and stuff like that. And I think
Yeah.
that this is a really big core lesson I've taken away from my psychedelic experiences and stuff like that, is this really, and I think that this level of empathy and understanding is needed to collectively heal some of these things. Because like these issues that you're describing, um, like, yes, it is separate, but I feel like also at the same time, like it unfortunately sort of like this gross expression of the collective right now. And I say gross, I think it's part of the path. I think but it needs to be healed. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
there's also like, sorry, were you finished with that thought?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think that like one of the biggest issues that I see in like the psychedelic community is easily the spiritual bypassing of people who sit with these substances and then just sort of act like these issues don't exist at all because like I had a mushroom trip and now I'm fully colorblind, or like I have a mushroom trip and now I don't see sexualities at all, like I don't see differences, is actually I think the opposite of a really, I think it can be operating at an extreme, like egoic level that you're just like, we're all the same and there are no differences. But actually, I find enlightenment in seeing the differences and honoring the differences and like not needing a homogenous sameness outside of just like our shared humanity and like collective unconsciousness, whatever you call that. Like it is a really beautiful thing that we all bring like different colors to this rainbow. And when we refuse to see the differences, then we refuse to see the ways we could be complicit to a lot of times like the struggles of others, you know? And that is a really big issue that I find in the psychedelic community, in the burner community, folks who just want to see like the homogenous glob.
Yeah, I feel like what you're describing is like real love. Like it's unconditional love. There's a lot of this like this form of love that I think people try and give things in other people, but it's not real love because you're really only loving that thing or person for what you want them to be or what you think they can be, right? Or what you can make
Yeah.
them into be, but not just like completely unconditionally loving them for the fullness of it and all the flaws and everything like that. I feel like that's like real love. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So what's Burning Man like? I've been to a few festivals and stuff, and but Burning Man's got its own whole reputation and stuff like that. What's the burn like?
Burning Man, I haven't been since 2023. Um, I had two back-to-back years of like extreme weather conditions, and I'm just like, I'm gonna just take this as a cue to kind of peace out for a bit because the mud was rough. The mud was real rough.
Yeah, that seemed like a
Um,
nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, we kept partying throughout it. It's just, it made the exodus or like the evacuation like a lot harder. And then we didn't get to have the burn week, or sorry, the burn weekends where like the man goes up, the temple goes up, all that kind of stuff. I will say the thing about Burning Man is like you become a magnet out there. So you attract, you know, like-minded people, folks who are similar to you. I have a lot of videos on my, YouTube channel about this for anybody who's curious. The playlist is called Black Rock City Living. And I have also a documentary called Black at Burning Man, The New 1%, because Black people only make up 1% of Burning Man, which is wild because it takes place
Interesting.
in the United
Why
States.
do you think that is? That's such a that's such a large like you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, we make up
if it was like 40%, it's like okay, maybe this is randomness, but
We make up 14% of the United States population, and I think recently we might have hit 2% at Burning Man. A lot of people try to blame the organization Burning Man org for like, lack of DEI initiatives. However, the founder of Burning Man set a culture that was extremely exclusive to Black people, Larry Harvey. And he specifically literally said when he was asked, why do you think there aren't more Black people at Burning Man? He said, well, Black people, they don't really fuck with camping like that. They're not really trying to camp. Like, what? You said Black people don't fuck with camping?
what?
Okay.
What?
Yeah, he said black people don't really camp like that.
Yeah.
So, one,
So
it's the
when you
culture of
make a
the founders.
statement like that, it's like you got to back that up. Like, do we have data or some
No, he
shit?
didn't back that up. I mean, he
Yeah.
didn't back it up. He didn't retract it. He died.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So rest in peace.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, it's first off the culture of the founders. If the founders are making excuses for there not being a greater variety of people, the citizens are not going to make they're not going to go out of their way. But secondly, what I personally think the issue is burners. Like, new burners are people who you invite. So if you do not have any black friends to invite, that's going to be representative in the population. Um, Also, if you make the assumption that like everybody at your office might be down to go to Burning Man with you, and the black girl at the walks up to the water cooler or whatever, the water machine, and is like, "Hey, what you guys talking about?" You might just assume she's not interested in Burning Man and change the subject, and like, boom, she doesn't get the invite. So it's really an issue within the population of burners, in my opinion. Because if I was a white person, I would be paying for black people to come out to Burning Man. And to be fair, the Broners do. The Broners bring out black and indigenous people, and they bring them to the burn, and they put them up for free, and they have a lovely time. But I think more people need to be moving like the Broners.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting insight that you had to that because myself as somebody who's been to quite a few different music festivals and stuff now, that was sort of how I got brought into it. Was, I had been somewhat aware of this scene and everything, but really what it took was one of my friends being like, "Hey, motherfucker, you're doing this with me." Like, you really, of
Yeah.
course, he couldn't have actually made me, but it was kind of done in this way of like, "Hey, Gabe, you're going to be a part of this community and it's going to be really good for you. And this is what we're doing." And I was just like, okay. And it literally changed my life. This crazy ripple effect.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but,
The
and
the money
I've
is
done a,
there too.
yeah, and I've done a similar thing with a few different friends at this point as well too. Of like, "Hey man, like you should come to this festival. Like let's go to this festival or something." And like, so I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, of course, there's a lot of money that goes into marketing. Like Bonnaroo has targeted me and hits me on ads all the time and things like that. But a lot of the marketing and the spreading of these music festivals is word of mouth, and it's word of mouth in these like friend groups that bring another friend and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, I wonder what because you said black people make up 14% of the United States population. They're making up right at this point close to like 2% of the Burning Man population. I wonder and I don't know if this is something you've looked into. I'm sure it's hard to get data on something like this, but I wonder within this sort of like psychedelic esoteric space, what percentage of it is represented by black people as well too? Because then if it's also a small percentage, same thing as like with Burning Man, that raises the question as to why. Is there systematic things put in place that are making that happen? Is it a cultural thing where black people aren't as into Burning Man or
Yeah.
psychedelics as much? It's I don't
I will
know.
say I see much greater representation for Black and Indigenous people in psychedelics and the psychedelic movement than I do see at Burning Man. Specifically, like coming out of Oakland, like I don't know if you've ever gone to the Oakland like psychedelic conference over there, but it's majority Black. Like shout out Reggie. He has also like an amazing podcast. I think it's Hyphae Leaks podcast, and like there are a lot of people doing a lot of work to highlight the voices of Black and Indigenous people in the psychedelic community. And then also like MAPS, the Broners, like all these people are also footing the bill and paying them to do this. I think that I see a lot more people uplifting the voices of Black and Indigenous people in psychedelics in a way that I don't see at Burning Man outside of like, again, the Bronner's camp. They have the best camp. They do a speaker series that really highlights these voices as well. But there's a lot of gatekeeping
Yeah.
around Burning Man. And I don't see that same gatekeeping in a lot of the psychedelic community. I will say not all of it, obviously, but I've had a really great time at Burning Man. I've had a really great, insightful time at Burning Man. The first person who brought me out to Burning Man was like a white guy in my artist community who like paid my way to get there. So that's how I personally got out there the first time. And like my dream in life and like one of my goals around burning is to like find enough money and resources to bring like young Black artists, especially specifically like from Baltimore City, would be great to come out to the burn and to just put them up and show them what is possible. I saw
Yeah.
so many things at Burning Man for the first time that I literally felt like I was like in an Octavia Butler novel. It was like so futuristic. I saw my first drone show out there, like so much art that is just I can't even describe. And so I think there really needs to be more initiatives, you know, some more initiatives to bring different types of folks out there because there are billionaires. There are hella billionaires at Burning Man. I think the billionaires should feel a lot less comfortable being out there. And I think, yeah, folks of color should feel more comfortable and more welcomed and more invited to go out there.
Well, I think with what's happening with recent events in our country, some billionaires might be a little bit more apprehensive about being at
Burning
Burning
Man.
Man.
I don't
But
think they should feel comfortable going to Burning Man this year, personally. I think they should sit Burning Man out. You know, obviously not all CEOs are quaking in their boots right now, but for the ones who escaped Burning Man on a helicopter, I won't name names. Um, you guys should not feel comfortable going this year.
well, I'm sitting here and I'm sitting here thinking too. Um, so, what would be a good way? Because you described like there's certain incentives and things like that already put in place. They have they're putting some people up and stuff like that at some of these events. But what is like a really effective way to do that at scale? You know what I'm saying? I'm kind of just like thinking out loud with you right now about this and
Hmm.
like maybe brainstorming a bit. But
Yeah,
if it's both sort of like this gatekeeping that's happened and like uh, interesting cultural phenomenon and things like that, like what is because like it ultimately if it comes down to like it's kind of like yeah how do we like efficaciously do that because I think that them putting people up and paying for their trips stuff like that that's great, but how do we get it so that like black people naturally just like want to fill that void? They don't need to have somebody offer, you know what I mean, to put them up and stuff like that. um yeah,
I can say
you
all
think?
of the Black people who are in my life are extremely curious about going to Burning Man and want to go to Burning Man. Um, for folks who maybe income is limiting to them, Burning Man does have a low income ticket program. But for me, what I think would be like incredible sort of reparations would be an additional tax onto a Burning Man ticket where it's like everybody pays this amount of money more. And then there are certain slots allotted for Black and Indigenous artists or organizers. And like, let's say that's like 1,000 slots, you know, or it starts out at a low number like that. And every year it grows. There are taxes. There could be easily like a tax that people pay. The price of Burning Man has gone up over the years and people will pay whatever they have to get in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And there are a bunch of BIPOC camps that specifically have spaces for these new folks to come in.
yeah.
But yeah.
I like that
Also,
idea. I will say this. I like that idea personally, but you and I both know proposing or the potential trying implementation of that particular idea, there would be a lot of pushback, I feel like, proposing a sort
yeah,
of
so it
tax.
would have to be under a specific like social initiative that also affects other
Hmm.
things. It does exist right now for the Northern Paiute tribe, which is the tribe that is indigenous to the land that Burning Man is currently on. My
Oh, that's
understanding,
badass. I love
yeah,
that.
my understanding is members of that tribe can attend Burning Man free of cost. So it would be an expansion of a pre-existing program like that. And I think the issue is within the culture that the people at the bottom, in the middle, and at the top, there might not be enough people who care to pitch initiatives like that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's the
because
issue. It's not an issue of like logistically this couldn't happen.
implementing. Yeah, it's collectively like having our attention pointed on that, like collectively, right? It's kind of what you're describing, like getting our attention on that actually, because like if we all have our attention on it, the implementation and rollout would fall, through after the fact. But we had to first get our attention on it,
Yeah, and like I will say, I really do feel like a lot of the big voices in the psychedelic scene that attend Burning Man do give a fuck. Like I do believe the Greys give a fuck. I believe the Doblins give a fuck. I believe the Bronners give a fuck. But those are people who are acting in a very radical way and moving in a way that is extremely unlike the rest of the population there, you know? So it's a matter of also like spreading their ideals. Um, which I think they do through their speaker series a lot, but even further would have to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. This has been awesome. This has been a really fun
Would you go to
conversation.
Burning Man, Gabe?
I would go to Burning Man. Are you inviting me?
I can put you on my list for people in the future when I go. I think I'll be in Asia this year. At that time.
Please put me on the list. Yeah.
Okay. And does your girlfriend
Because
want to go?
she would love to. You can put her on the list as well too. She really enjoys the music festival scene with me and
Now,
stuff.
let me tell you, there is a couple's curse, so you guys might have to camp separately.
So okay, I saw this thumbnail earlier. I didn't have a chance to watch your video,
My
but I
YouTube?
saw it. I saw your YouTube video about the couple's curse of Burning Man. What is that?
It's basically like Burning Man is a relationship accelerant, a relationship accelerator. So if you go with somebody who you were only going to last 3 more months with, it will
Yeah,
age you like 10 years. Like
like
it
really
will age
quickly.
the relationship by 10 years. It's a pressure pot. So if you were going to last with your girlfriend at least 20 more years, you'll be fine.
It's really funny you say that because I've said this to multiple people about Bonnaroo now, but I said this to my girlfriend. We were going to Bonnaroo last year. It was her first time going with me.
Nice.
But I was like, babe, I was like, I really want you to go to Bonnaroo. I think we're gonna have a blast. I was like, but beware. I was like, Bonnaroo can sometimes put it like it'll test relationships. And yeah, it absolutely like there was this polarity of both great and bad and stuff, but like it was this really formidable kind of like lock in our relationship of like, yeah, if we can make it through that, you know what I mean? Like, um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I see that phenomenon that you're describing, and I don't know if it's as pronounced, but there's a similar phenomenon with Bonnaroo as well too, and I'm sure a lot of other music festivals because I think ultimately like after several days of sleeping on the ground, being sleep deprived, and like all the things being opened up by various chemicals and the music and the connection and all the things, like there is within a relationship, I think this happens quite a bit within relationships. People at first put on some sort of like mask,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's to be accepted and pull the other person in and things like that. But over time, and sometimes it takes people 3 weeks, sometimes it takes people 3 years. But
Yeah.
eventually that mask has to come off at some
Yeah.
point. You know what I'm saying? If it is a mask. And I think something like a music festival, Burning Man, Bonnaroo, like it's going to, for most people, make you fucking take that mask off
Yeah.
at some point. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I would please add me to the Burning Man list. I would be honored. It's
I
Burning
will.
Man. It's kind of like one of those things. It reminds me of like certain various compounds, like with combo, for example, is something I was really interested in for a long time. But I had this attitude of like, well, I'm within these circles quite a bit, and like so, like I know at some point it's going to be offered to me, like when it's the right time. You know what I'm saying? And that's how
Yeah.
I've gone about a lot of these things, and it's played out beautifully. And so that's kind of how I felt about Burning Man for a while. Like really interested, but I feel like somebody's going to invite me, you know. And
Yeah, and
it's
you got to prepare at least a year out. That's why, like, the famous quote about Burning Man is like, "Oh, I'll go next year." Like, I'm going to Burning Man next year. Like, that's like famous last words, what a lot of people say. But it can be done. It's just it takes so much planning and preparation. Burning Man is like 80% planning and preparation, 10% travel, and then just like 10% actually being there and partying.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That would be awesome. Well, I'm probably gonna wrap this one up for the day. I really have to pee. I'm gonna stretch and stuff like that as well too. But is there anything else you wanted to touch up on, stuff like that, before we peace out of here?
Not in this episode, but have me back on and I have loads of other things to talk about.
100%. I would be honored. I'd love talking to you today. This was really cool getting to kind of know each other and stuff a little bit more.
Likewise, what state are you in?
I'm in Kentucky. I'm in Southwest Kentucky, rural Kentucky, about an hour away from Nashville.
How close are you to Red River Gorge?
Red River Gorge. I don't even.
That's my
I don't know.
favorite place, like, in the world.
Red River Gorge. Where's that at?
In Kentucky.
Really?
It's the best. Gabe, are you...
I'm completely oblivious right now. Red River
Oh, you're being
Gorge.
serious. Okay.
I'm actually Googling this right now. I swear to God. Wait, oh, Red River Gorge. Oh, okay. I've had friends go here. I think this is in another part of the state. Yeah, okay. So this is probably close to, have you heard of Mammoth Cave? There's these really, it's one of the biggest cave systems in the world. We have this really
Nice.
big cave system, and I think this
Oh,
is close to that area over there. But yeah, definitely need to check out Red River Gorge. There's a similar place to this near where I live called the Garden of the Gods in Illinois. It's about an
cool.
hour away from where I live, and it's got these like insane views. But I'll definitely be checking this out.
Next
Yeah.
episode, we gotta talk about the cave systems. We gotta touch on them
Yeah.
cave systems.
Are you interested in the cave systems?
Cave systems and all the missing people?
What's there's a word for this phenomenon. There's a word for this phenomenon of people going missing like within cave systems,
It's
and
like a map overlay that they did an overlay of like missing people and like also cave systems, and there's like a perfect correlation. But don't get me started, you guys. Stick around for the next episode. The Launchpad
100%.
Podcast that Chrysantilus is on.
Yeah.
We will
Yes,
touch on it.
let's go into the cave systems. We can start prepping for that one. That'll be a fun one. Fuck yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on, talking to me, spending your time with me. And
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Everyone, I will have Chrysantilus's all of her information, links, stuff like that down in the description. Please go check her stuff out. She's
Yes. Can I do my plugs really quick?
Please do. Please do.
Okay. Y'all can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Chrysantilus. Also, if you click the link in my bio, I have merch. I have one-on-ones for anybody looking to either self-publish a book on Amazon or a journal, low content publications. Or if you are looking to grow on social media or you know someone looking to grow on social media, I do one-on-ones for social media consultations and live streaming consultations. So please check out all those links. And I have new super cute Mush Love merch, really cute t-shirts that I design that are now available, as well as journals, including a trip journal and a dream journal. Again, all of those are the link in my bio for Instagram. Thank you for
Amazing.
having me, Gabe.
Of course. Yeah, I can't wait to have you back on. Much love, everybody. Peace.